Allow me to introduce our panelists this morning to take us through this discussion and after other issues as well here on AM Live. We are watching In the Market, and we have with us this morning Dr. Collins Odote, who is a lecturer at the University of Nairobi, also a columnist with the Business Daily. We do have with us as well Dr. Gituro Wainaina, who is also a lecturer at the School of Business, University of Nairobi. We have also with us Kwame Owino, who is the CEO of the Institute of Economic Affairs. Also, we do have with us Churchill Suba, who is from the NGO Council, Secretariat actually. Right, I'll give you the proper name of the organization. And also we do have with us as well Dr. Rachel Gesami, who is a lecturer at the Catholic University and also director of quality at that institution as well. Good morning, gentlemen and lady. Gentlemen and ladies.
Yes.
Good morning.
Right.
Thank you very much. So just beginning with the Business Daily and what it holds for us, to act as a segue to what we're discussing this morning, looking at what we have there on the front page of the Business Daily, that is pressure on taxpayers as the SGR loan falls due. We know the story that Kenya was also denied another tidy sum of money to extend this particular railway from Kisumu to Malaba as well, also Naivasha. Now we are left on the sharp page of On the Horn of Dilemma. What is the way forward? Maybe we can begin with Dr. Rachel Gesami.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning to you.
You know, we have talked about the debt of this country.
Yes.
And already everyone understands that we have the debt ratio in this country has gone beyond a level it should be, given the status of the country. Recently, I've started to think we actually have illegitimate debt because there are certain economic parameters that govern how a country should borrow, both bilateral, international money, and the domestic borrowing. Now, given the extreme inequality that we see in the country, where the rich are rich and the poor are really, you know, in the trenches,
yes,
it is important that the technocrats that are advising this country give the correct advice. The numbers we are seeing, and I don't have to go into the data of what the debt is. It is important that we start reducing the debt the way we are borrowing in this country. So I believe strongly that Kenya's borrowing spree has to stop. The president has to be advised adequately. And we do have, as I've said in this show before, that we have enough human capital that, you know, we have economists in this country. We have people in this country who understand the economies and how economies are run. So we shouldn't just go borrowing blindly. Now, when you look at the standard gauge rail, I think the planning from long time ago was really inadequate because we should have known what this rail would cost between Mombasa and Marava, if that's where we wanted to take it. But we decided we would borrow as it goes, and I think that's poor planning. I do not want, you know, to imagine that the president has to be in charge of this, because the president has the technocrats that he has put in place. We have technical people in Treasury, in the Central Bank, and in other institutions.
Yes.
So we need to strengthen our institutions to be able to manage debt in this country. I think I will stop there for now.
All right. Let's hear from Dr. Collins Odote.
I think on this show, we have had conversations about the debt burden for too long. There's been contestation as to whether the rates of debt that we have is sustainable and high, and government has kept on saying, you know, it is not. It is below the 70% threshold, and we've had a debate about figures. Even if you look at today's headline, the headline says that the amount is due in a month.
Yes.
The CS Treasury is being quoted as saying, no, it's not a month, it is January. I think the difference is a difference, a distinction without a difference. The huge reality is you don't need to be an economist like my friend Kwame to know the impact of the debt burden. You just need to talk to every innocent Kenyan and know that life is extremely difficult. I think if you leave today's Business Daily, I was reading also an article in yesterday's Business Daily,
Yes,
where some lady is saying that, before, when your salary is delayed, you had money in the bank against which you could even put a post-dated check and be paid. When people were late in being paid for their invoices, the banks would give them some overdraft facility. Now, when the normal occurrence has been that there's delays in paying VAT, there's delays in paying KRA. If you look at almost all businesses, no business pays their taxes consistently on time. And it isn't because they're trying to avoid tax. It just is because they cannot make ends meet. The end result is that we have a situation where there is no money. Government keeps on saying, no, that is not true. But my second last point, Dibal, if you look at the contestation between the national government and counties, I think it's the CS for Devolution, Eugene Wamalwa, who says now when they're justifying why they're reducing the amount of money they're allocating counties, they say, we have gone through a very rough year. There's been drought. The country hasn't made enough money. But if you go back to 2 months ago, you can remember the same CS was denying, the effects of drought that you're talking about is not true. So when it is convenient, when people are saying we are in a problem, we need to fix it, they run away from the problem. When the problem catches up with them and they want to now try and make life difficult for other agencies, then they say, actually, we have a problem. I think the reality, Dibal, is that the debt burden is unsustainable. And several of us have started saying that what we needed to see in the current budget is not more about increase of expenditure, but in terms of how we fix the loopholes. From the figures that I have seen, I see that we are still interested in living large and not interested in dealing with the debt burden.
All right, let's say from Kwame Owino, because also last week they came up with a report, and on it also there was an ominous cloud about us as a country facing a sovereign debt default in the next 5 to 10 years if no intervention is done right now. But it's still, the appetite is still very wet, and people are still on a borrowing spree as well. Looking at the front page of the Business Daily, they're saying now that we will be, is it the Business Daily, or I just saw it in one of the dailies today, that we're seeking more, I think it's in the Standard, that we're seeking more also bonds. We'll have the Sumurai bonds, we'll have the Islamic financial instrument as well. Something they've been also banning about, or a subject that has been broached before. This is the Sukuk bond as well. Still, we are seeking the 3.0 euro bond right now. So there are so many avenues that we're still looking out to. And you can weigh on this. Are we likely to face a sovereign debt default in this country? And what does it portend for Kenyans as well?
Okay, God forbid that happens. But I mean, our main argument was that, look, if you look at the kind of payments, because whatever people argue, and I know Treasury has been obsessed with telling us that our debt to GDP ratio is still much lower than, comparing us to Japan and a few other countries. Of course, it's not an appropriate comparison. But the issue is that our debt has been growing faster than revenues that we have to pay for that debt. That's our main problem. Secondly, the amount of time we have to pay our debt has been shrinking, meaning that we are facing more pressure to pay bigger sums quickly. So I too was under the impression that actually by July of this year, the first tranche, the big principle for SGR is over. Was due. If the cabinet secretary says it's due in January, fine. That's another 4.5 months or 5 months. So we take his word as given, but it doesn't mean the amount that is to be paid is any less. We are still going to have to pay that. Budget estimates were also released a couple of weeks back. So the estimates were released early this week. And one of the things that it shows you is why we should continue to have this discussion on debt soberly. One of the things that it shows is that we expect to raise, I think, 1.8 trillion shillings from debt. We will miss that number, just like last year we expected to raise 1.8 and we missed it, but we'll miss it. And what that means is relative to, rather, comparing as a share of their debt, close to 60% of the money that will be collected in revenues is just going to pay for debt fast, which means the rest of the money that we have is insufficient to even pay salaries for public sector workers. Meaning, we are getting to the point where it's possible we'll be borrowing money to actually just pay wages. That's not a good position to be in. So whatever else, whatever other flowery language we may adopt, it's very, very clear to us that we are in a moment where we need to take a stop and ask ourselves, how are we going to manage our debt payments which are definitely coming due? And among the things we are arguing to prevent us from the pressure of default is actually to stretch the length of our debts, because they're coming too quickly and too soon. Many of them are coming up together. So what that means is we're going to have to negotiate with the people we owe and stretch the tenure, which means to ask them to buy more time, give us a couple more, 2 more, 3 more years, so that as the economy recovers, the payments don't come in too quickly and in a way that chokes us. That's the point.
So what does this, the 5 years period that is given as a grace period by the Chinese, what does it portend? The mounting pressure also on wananchi, what we have on the front page of a Business Daily.
No, it's over. I mean, the 5-year grace period was given at the beginning of 2014 when the construction of SGR started and the contract was signed. So it ends this year. That's why I say that in our view it was supposed to end this year, but the cabinet secretary says it ends in June. I mean in May, in January next year. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
4 or 5 months for 100 billion or so, rather 80 billion or so is not little, because even between now and then we have payments to make, and so that's going to stand. So we are not going to be able to buy ourselves time of 2-3 months. What we need is actually to buy some time of about 3 years to try and sort out things so that we buy space to breathe. Otherwise, what it means this year is government will pay salaries, government will pay debts, and then we'll have nothing else to spend. Just like many projects, roads, water projects are actually stuck, partly because not enough money is coming in to roll them out.
Right. If you may just pick a copy of a Star this morning as well, this is what it holds. Rotich says that 61% of your taxes to pay debts. And also what you're raising as a concern is a matter of fact that our wage bill will need now to borrow money to actually pay that particular wage bill. But last week we saw also, I think it was on Monday, that also the civil servants, they will actually be getting a pay hike. So they're actually reviewing that. In light of all this that we're seeing, if we are actually spending 61% of our taxes to pay the debts, also we'll be borrowing money to also pay our wage bill. Why aren't we waking up to the reality that we are, as a country, in a pickle, and we need to tame our, our consumption, because we are a consuming country?
Well, I think I think this has to be shared responsibility, and principally that responsibility is between the parliament on the one side and the executive. So it's okay. I think the constitution allows the cabinet secretary to present estimates given his assessment of what the economy can afford, or rather what taxes can be raised and what needs to be done in terms of priorities for development. But it's upon parliament to also check item by item about what we need to buy. So for instance, last week the press was reported, and these are facts, that the judiciary alone intends to buy another 200 cars, very high-end machines for judges and judicial officers in an environment like this. To even present that kind of budget at a time like this just tells you how insensitive people in the public sector are to the burdens that Kenya face and the situation that we face. And I'm not going to point the judiciary alone. I mean, the national government has been buying cars for forever, replacing cars every now and again through leases and all that. So this conspicuous consumption, it's something that government has ingrained in public sector people. There's a sense of entitlement that whatever the luxuries they want, as taxpayers we should pay because they're constitutional offices. It's unacceptable. And the only people who can stop it is parliament. They seem not to be the wiser for it. They're looking for their own parks here and there as well. And they're claiming now, 5 years after people have been telling them that the debt is a problem, they're now claiming to have suddenly woken up and are trying to bring in bills to try and control debt and all that. I mean, it's wrong that in the 5 years that we've gone deeper into debt, actually, it's looked like we're in a circus, like nobody's really in charge and nobody really understands what's going on. It's a pity.
Right, let's hear from Churchill Suba, who's the national coordinator of the National Civil Society Congress. Good morning, sir.
Morning. I have a hoarse voice, but I'll manage nevertheless. I think as a country, we have undertaken quite some massive infrastructural development, which ordinarily should be good. But what I find a bit concerning is the lack of transparency. Ordinarily, the CS for Treasury should be making public a debt register that as Kenyans and as taxpayers we are entitled to know how many debts and for what purpose did we incur them. I know for a fact that even to date we are still paying for some fertilizer factory that never got built. We need to know more about the SGR. I think civil society, I remember one day under the auspices of the African Center for Open Governance, we had a forum to discuss the feasibility of SGR as a national project. And we were switched off air. And a local television station that was giving us live coverage was ordered to get us off air. And that tells you that there was something dubious that was going on. And I think the reality has caught up with us as a country. And the government is beginning to realize that it ought to have been more transparent than it has been. There is what Dr. has talked about. Debts that have been borrowed in the name of the people, but which have not been used for the benefit of the general public. I think the terminology for them are odious debts, and we have quite a number of those such debts. And that is why having an open register of all debts that we owe as a country,
yes,
and for what purposes they were borrowed becomes very, very important. There is a principle in our constitution,
yes,
which those of us who participated in drafting and adopting the constitution deliberately inserted, and that was the principle of intergenerational equity.
yes.
And I think it is important that the older generation does not bequeath the younger generation and those who are yet to be born debts that they know very little about,
Yes.
debts that they may not benefit from, even though we know that even at an individual level, at times you have to borrow in order to develop. And therefore, such odious debts that were borrowed in the name of the people, in the name of projects,
Yes,
that were made to look glossy at the time of borrowing, but which have not come to fruition, I think, is something that does not portend for us well as a country. Yes.
Thank you. So we have these figures here that the cash spent on servicing Kenya's ballooning public debt surged by 75% in 9 months to March, underlying the burden debt payment is having on taxpayers. Debt repayment costs hit 538.2 billion shillings in the 9 months from 273.64 billion in a similar period a year earlier. That is according to Treasury data. And that means that Treasury spent an equivalent of 1.94 billion shillings daily, or 59.8 billion shillings monthly on debt repayments, up from 1.13 billion shillings daily and 34.36 billion shillings monthly in the year ended 2018. So the rising debt servicing costs amid below targets growth in tax collection have seen the allocation of cash for projects such as building roads, power lines, water and sewage network remain depressed. That is the reality. But this is a staggering figure when we're talking about 1.94 billion shillings daily that is actually spent on debt repayment, Dr. Rachel.
Deepa, I think this is a very emotive subject in this country, and I believe strongly that Kenya is caught between debt and political indifference. Because I don't understand why we talk about the debt, and we are people who are supposed to manage the debt, to manage the big five, so that we can develop as a country. Now, you are talking of those are expenditures. And it's important for us to know that if you are running even a small enterprise and you are paying more than 12%, 12 point something percent on the overheads, then you are not doing business. I mean, that's a common sense kind of thing. So if you look at the bilateral debt in Kenya today, the stock of debt from China grew to about 52.8%.
Yes.
And that is recorded. Now, when you look at the public debt itself, domestic has gone to I think it's trillions. And then we have the external debt, of course. But then when you look at the control of China, of the Kenyan economy now, it's at 66%. I didn't want to go into data, but the data never rise. If you have data, it says the truth. We simply need to start knowing what we are using in terms of consumption and what is being borrowed. And I think this has already been said by my colleagues here. We cannot borrow for consumption. If your household is borrowing for consumption, that's bad enough. Our whole government is borrowing so that, you know, they can consume. Now, we talked about judiciary, we talked about parliament. We have 3 arms of government, and everybody knows that. Which one controls what? Everybody is cooking up to say, oh, I want this and I want this. And whenever we talk about parliament, I always believe that parliament gets this, it is at the tail end, if you ask me. The budget is done by the technocrats. The actual parameters are supposed to be set by the technocrats. Then they take it to parliament for approval. Let the parliamentarians also say whether what they are approving makes sense to them. So we cannot have this blame game. And when we are having the entire population of Kenya having severe inequality in income distribution, having serious loans. Do you know how many loans we have? School loans with the students. We are at the university, we see how the students suffer with their loans. There are decent loans. Those are the issues that, you know, people should think about. Who is going to think about the poverty levels in this country? If we are going to borrow for consumption, we have a very huge revenue base. And this I can clearly say. I don't know how we collect revenue in this country. Because the revenue base we have, within Africa, actually, we are number 3. I think it's Egypt, South Africa, and then Kenya. We collect enough revenue, but the consumption. And I've asked this question here before. Why would one man be guarded by 10 security men? What has he done to need that security? I walk around here. You can do whatever you want with me, but I'm also a Kenyan and I have rights. So if I'm just appointed to a position, then all of a sudden I'll become very important. I must have 10 security men who the Kenyan public is paying for.
Oh.
So all of these things is what we call consumption, and we need to stop and rationalize everything that we do as Kenyans.
Dr. Gitura never had a voice. I actually missed you out. Huh?
Yes, I saw.
You did interject.
You're giving a
why I
That's
said-
okay.
This is
okay.
very bad.
That's okay.
But when we circle back, we come back with Dr. Gitura as well. But he is also another reality that you need to wake up to as well. About 45 million Kenyans will need to work for 8 months without spending on anything else to repay the 5.4 trillion shillings loan. That is a reality. So Kenya, we need to wake up as far as this debt is concerned, and we're still seeking more and more and more. We go for the Sukuk bond, we will go for Samurai bond, we will go for whatever bond with whichever name that is out there in the world. And what will that really portend for this country? We continue with the discussion. You're watching In the Market here on AM Live. When we circle back, we'll also hear from Dr. Gitura Wanaina. Don't go away. You've been an audience today.
Yeah. We'll continue. At the sovereign rating, you know, Moody dropped us.
But I saw tea for the guests?
These are men, they have no idea.
Why don't we have that small table there? I can serve them, man. They...
I didn't know I read this
Usha.
in reality.
Right, welcome back. You're watching In the Market here on AM Live. About 45 million Kenyans will need to work for 8 months without spending on anything else to repay the 5.4 trillion shillings loan. This is what we have here, if my director may just pick up on that. And we promise to circle back with Dr. Gituro Wanaina from the University of Nairobi, School of Business.
Yes.
Daktari.
Yes. Good to see you, Deva.
Good to see you.
Thanks. I think what is coming from the discussion from my colleagues here, I think let's also be a bit positive. And today I want to take the position of being positive in the sense that I think there are benefits we have seen over time, and we must recognize that for the various investments we have done. And something which comes to my mind is roads. If you look at road infrastructure, really, is something perhaps we need to be happy about. I think as much as this animal we call the SGR has been there are benefits. By the way, in terms of actually thinking, I think the government has no business doing the SGR to the border. As Demo pointed out, to me, Uganda should be doing that.
So what was?
They should be borrowing. We need the goods from there to go, not us. But I want to take three things, and I hear you, Kwame. I think, Kwame, I like your point, but it should go beyond the National Assembly. We need to also bring the executive very, very strongly there. It's not just the parliament, which must say, no, you guys, we are on a spending spree. It's not making sense at all. So the executive, to me, needs to come in very strongly. But I think what we need to do, we need to start focusing on production. Even in that 8 months we're talking about, how can we focus on production? And I'm looking at three things only. I'm looking at manufacturing. To me, that's something which can turn things around so quickly, manufacturing. And I was sharing with somebody last week, and they're saying, if you look, most of us, we are going to the racist way of investment. The racist way is to build flats. Build. How many people do you employ? 2, caretaker and watchmen. But what about if I put that amount, that investment in manufacturing? How many Kenyans can we employ? And I think it's where I'm saying that the executive comes, the government comes in. There are certain things the manufacturers have been asking we need to address in terms of VAT, in terms of whatever they are paying, so that we can actually bring that impetus in the manufacturers. 6 months, manufacturer can turn around in terms of employment. And they're not asking so much. Those guys are good. They have the funds to invest. I think the government should step back. What are these things we can do to encourage? Ghana has taken that route. If you listen to your deputy president in Mauritius, talking to investors, things we can buy from there. Talk manufacturing, agriculture, leverage on tea. Leverage things we are good at. If you look at the economic survey, tea to Pakistan, to Egypt. How do we encourage those farmers to do that? The third one, which I think is important, is tourism. It's a winner. If we can bring our security quickly, that we don't need a lot of investment. The entrepreneurs already need. So to me, we need to look at that production, and I can give you, within 1 year, we'll probably see the benefits from there. However, at the same time, there are two things we need to address, and I agree with my sister there. All of a sudden, it becomes important when you have this position and the security over it. How do we now become conscious in terms of our expenditure? And those who can remember the time even when the president was a minister for finance, we can only buy this type of vehicles. I think we need to bring those hard-hitting decisions in terms of expenditure. You can't spend more than what you don't have. Thirdly, and probably if you pick a newspaper every day, is the leakages we have. A lot. There are a lot of leakages. 10 shillings, 90 cents, 9 shillings is going to leakage. And I think that's why I see the executive, I see the judiciary, I see the National Assembly coming in. What I want perhaps, and I agree with, when you have issues even with your bank, what do? You ask for an extended period. I think that makes a lot of sense, Kwame is bringing here. But when I get that extended period, I need to be more prudent in terms of my expenditure, in terms of leakages, and I must be productive. And I think this country is like we have gone to sleep in terms of production. Now, if you look at the economic survey saying, and I have a lot of respect for informal sector, that's where the growth was. How do we leverage on that sector so that we can produce more? So to me, perhaps the way to address this debt, let's be more productive. Let's forget about conspicuous consumption. Yesterday I had my grandson, and we were traveling to Muranga, and she kept on saying, this is a Prado, this is a Prado. Then she went to the next stage. Is it a GK or is it not GK? And it was very telling as he was talking. I think as much as we require the government people to use this kind of thing, I think we are extravagant in this. And I've always argued it when I was even in government. Why should I have my driver travel with him all the way to Mombasa and then he come back? I can go to Mombasa and get from the government vehicles there. Simple things we can do. Because the Mwananchi also want to see we are also taking certain decisions in terms of the expenditures we are incurring. And I think we need to address that very strong. And that's why the executive comes very strong. I don't know this nonsense. Let's move this direction.
Okay. Let's hear from Dr. Collins Odote.
Dibal, I was initially worried when Aina started speaking, because he was speaking as if he was advocating for the big four, that let's focus on manufacturing, let's focus on agriculture, let's focus on tourism. But I agree.
Why are you worried about the big four?
Because I think we should stop focusing on the big four. In fact, when I looked at today's newspapers, I think there's a statement about how much has been allocated for the big four.
That is the Business Daily. That is
Yes,
400.
Yes, 451 billion allocated for
yes.
the big four. I think that is the wrong side of the equation. The reality is that we are in a hole. And if we are in a hole, we must first fix the last side of Gituro's conversations. And that is the huge expenditure and the leakages. I think time has come for the 2008 austerity measures. That's what we need to see in budget. When you spend 61 shillings out of 100, whether you are in a house, whether you are in a business, whether you are in a country, it is unsustainable. You will continue borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and soon Peter and Paul will meet in your house and you'll be in trouble. So we must start fixing, because now where we are, even if you allocate 400 and if you allocate the amount of money that is in the Business Daily, 451 billion,
yes.
Our greatest worry becomes, out of that 451 billion, how much of it will actually be used for the big four?
Correct.
You will find that more than 60 will go in leakages. So we aren't actually servicing the big four. We are servicing individuals benefiting from the big four. So until we fix those leakages, we are going in the wrong way. For me, what we need to do, and do urgently, is number one, people must stop living in government as if we are in the good old days. We are not. In 2008, we were told we can only buy Passats. Let's see what is innovative that we are being told in terms of reducing expenditure. And we must cut our cloth according to our size. The second is this conversation about the fight against corruption must be more serious. So that we can stop future leakages. That's, for me, is where the focus must be. The greatest focus, it must not be about how many people we will jail for past corruption. That is nice for the anti-corruption fight, but for the economic issue, what is more important is to be able to be sure that from tomorrow, there will be no or very little corruption taking place. Because that's the only way that the little that we have will be stretched for a long time. If you add that on to other measures in terms of saying, of the things that are priority, what must we do? The president said last year, no new projects.
That made a lot of sense.
It made a lot of sense. But we also must start asking ourselves on the existing projects, what are we prioritizing? And as we prioritize them, we must be prioritizing the ones that will unlock the economy, so that we will have a ripple effect. That's the kind of conversation we should be having. Thirdly, Dibal, Parliament last week talk about something that only Kwame has been speaking about for a long time. Kwame has been telling Parliament that, you know, our debt levels is not a responsibility of the executive. It's a responsibility of the legislature. They spoke about it in a whimpering manner. You know, these debts are sustainable, we'll soon pass a law. You don't even need a law. The Constitution already gives you the mandate. Every year, you are given a budget, budget proposals. You approve it. By approving it, you approve how much government is going to borrow. Start from this year and tell government we can't be borrowing more, so that we are paying 61%. Look at even the conversations about the new SGR loan that was supposed to take the SGR to Kisumu. The debate was a debate as to whether we should have an SGR going to Kisumu or not. The debate was not about, so what are the economic fundamentals? Nobody was raising the concern that, look, SGR from Mombasa to Nairobi has been and continues to be loss-making. Its extension to Naivasha is continuing to be loss-making. Can we sustain the debt again? Nobody was discussing that. Even now, the only conversation is, did the president and Raila get what they went to? That's the wrong side of the stick. The bigger side of the stick is that was going to be much more debt on this country, and we need to call a spade and start saying we simply cannot be able to sustain some of the debt conversations.
Which is sad, if it's actually being seen from the other side. And I think at times we need to come very strong in terms of what, and Kwame, I'm really talking to you now. What is this we can say? If China is telling us, I'm not quite sure about the whole story, that it's not possible to ready to do to Naivasha, what are we telling our government ourselves? And the number speaks there. This is not viable. You know? And I think, to me, I believe very strongly, you have heard me do nothing, but you have heard me. And I think it's important also to, when I see the business data of yesterday, and you see the gentleman called Mwangi, James, if you look the expansion he's doing, it's unbelievable. And I think we have that capacity in this country. People who can turn the economy around. Or what they don't want everybody at the door. You okay like this. Let's talk about certain ways we can deal with it. When I see he's going to Mozambique, when I see he's going there, that's what it's all about, the entrepreneurs with it.
Thank you.
Give these people opportunities.
All right. Let's come to Kwame, because now so many issues have been raised here. But Kwame, first of all, even as we're seeking more bonds right now, as we mentioned before, the Auditor General is faulting the National Treasury for failing to disclose the specific development projects that were financed with the funds, the previous bonds. And in a special audit report table in the National Assembly by Majority Leader Eden Duale, Oko confirms the Eurobond proceeds, if I may just pick up on what is on the laptop, were received in the country's national exchequer account, but how the money was spent could not be established. Should we first have an account of what really happened with the previous Eurobond? The Auditor General is speaking out this now, yet we're going for another Eurobond, so to speak.
You see, the process, the amount of work that is required to prepare a proposal, as prospectus as they call it, and then to go out there to speak to people who could actually buy, it's a very onerous process. So once Treasury has gone through that with of course approval of the cabinet and gotten this money, it's alarming that when it comes to accounting for the money, we now say that, look, this was put together with all the other money in the accounts and we're not too sure, because most often than not, nobody will give you money if you say we are actually borrowing to go and pay salaries. Most of these bonds were actually most of these bonds were actually marketed on the view that, look, we need to build certain infrastructure projects that we have. They were even lined up. Some of them were even costed, in addition to, of course, redeeming some earlier debt. And so that was the plan. Now, if we cannot prove that this specific money was directed there, so it means it was put together with everything else and spent as was, it's not surprising then that part of this money actually funded or ended up in some of the corruption that's now being investigated. That's the extent of lack of care that you see on the side of Treasury and you see in Parliament as well. Because this is not something that we needed to even talk about. I mean, Parliament should have said Eurobond, the shows were in, we had the second one, but they should have asked, fine, you need authorization to be able to spend and to contract debt and to pay for it. How do you confirm to us, because we now have this year's debt, right? How do you confirm to, or rather this year's budget, how do you confirm to us that the last year's debt contracted in Eurobond 2, which was last year, was spent properly? That kind of questioning, the idea that we even think that kind of question is irrelevant, or we must start to handle it when we have a crisis, just tells me that the people who've actually thrown or dropped the ball is Parliament. Because Parliament's work is that oversight. And if you're having all these huge sums of money, because $3 billion is not little money. 300 billion is not little money. If you have that amount of money coming in and nobody can trace where the exact shilling went to and whether it's what was paying for a specific dam or a specific water project or specific roads, because you said in your prospectus that that is where it would go, if you can't trace it back there and you're saying we simply mixed it up with everything else, I think that tells you something about the way we manage public finances, and it's not good. No wonder we actually have debts that we're not too sure are legitimate, as people are claiming, because somebody comes to the central bank and claims that I'm owed money for a bond that I bought 10 years ago, and nobody has records about it. That's the kind of carelessness we're dealing with.
If I was in Treasury, I would step back. I think we need, Treasury without being told need to be very, very clear. This is what we did, this is what we got. Yeah. Get public
transparency,
back.
yeah.
Get
Communications,
back to the
this is where
yes,
really
communicate to the public.
Let's inform Churchill, because now it seems, yes, as Kwame is saying, and also Dr. Gituro, we have an issue of Parliament really failing us right now. Absolutely. And we have also Mgwen, Member of Parliament, coming up with another amendment to the Public Finance Act that, yes, we should cap actually the borrowing, the rate of borrowing in this country. Do we need that? You say we don't need that in the first place, because these budgets, they go through Parliament. They have the wherewithal to stop the passing of these particular budgets as well. But since now we don't have an opposition that can actually speak for this country, so to speak, as in, yeah, they say the opposition as it is right now is dead. Even the civil society itself now, it seems you've been muzzled as well. I don't know, maybe with there is no one speaking. We are left, at the mercies now of these legislators in the Parliament. The civil society has become very mealy-mouthed of late, and we wonder why. Is it because of the public, the PBO Act?
Partly, but I think
partly. So you were muzzled.
So I think over the last 5 years or so, you'll agree with me that civil society has been on the receiving end, not just because of failure to implement the PBO Act, but we have seen acts of intimidation. We have seen organizations being deregistered. You remember the reigns of Fazul Mohammed at the NGO board?
Yes.
During which, organizations that appeared to be vocal and critical of certain decisions were accused of all manner of allegations, including, working with terrorists and all those groups. You saw for a fact when Kenya Revenue Authority, for example, invaded African Center for Open Governance, Kenya Human Rights Commission, and many others. So those acts of intimidation have had a chilling effect on the activities of civil society. But civil society is not just NGOs. Civil society means even ordinary citizens. So as Kenyans, I think we get it wrong when we elect the wrong people as our representatives. And I think what is coming out in this debate is whether, and I want to agree with Kwame and Dr. Dote that we are witnessing a situation of massive failure by institutions that have been established and that are sustained by public resources to ensure that the executives, both at national and county level, do the right thing. You have seen quite often the Senate has had to intervene, not because there cannot be such intervention at county level, but because of the incompetence and complete failure of our county assemblies to hold county governments to account. Secondly, I want to say that we cannot absolve Parliament from responsibility for our indebtedness as a country. That today there is a sense in which the new constitution turned the budget-making process over its head it is no longer preserve of the executive as such.
Yes.
We have a parliament, a budget committee in parliament that is solely in charge of the budget making process. And I think the only thing that the technocrats do is to put the instructions of the budget making committee in the language that is parliamentary or financial in character. Two, I want to say that there is a sense in which our indebtedness is driven by politics. And I think as a country, both as leaders and as citizens, we have never been honest, even to ourselves. Look at the way we used to criticize retired President Moi over the presidential jet. What happened when Kibaki took over? It became a good thing. Look at the way we as Kenyans and as opposition, we used to criticize, you know, the construction of the SGR. What happens after the handshake? Everything becomes good. And I think what is lacking in our politics is the honesty and integrity that is required of us, not just in the constitution, but as a country that wants to move forward both economically and socially. And I want to add that as civil society, I think we have been the most consistent actor in all these processes. Even though we have been on the receiving end, we have always called government to account. We have always questioned and demanded that there be greater accountability and openness in some of these national processes. And my worry is, as long as the Big Four agenda, as long as some of these things are tied to the legacy that President Uhuru Kenyatta wants to leave, I think that is the main driving force behind our indebtedness. And it gets worse when opposition that should have held the government to account is virtually non-existent, both in the legislature and outside parliament.
Right, Dr. Isami.
Thank you, Diba. I want to pick it from my colleague from Nairobi University.
Gituro.
We were used to be in Vision 2030 delivery board with him, and he knows what the plans were on the table.
Actually,
Now,
we should put him on the spot as
yes,
well.
I-
He used to be the
No,
CEO
no,
of the
no,
Vision
let it-
2030.
don't
They
take my
both-
time.
they-
Don't
We've
take
never
my
known
time.
even.
Yes, I'm
You know,
here.
I want to understand, when you say that you are not sure whether the SGR should go to the border, what does that mean? Why did we even start it? How can it be profitable if it cannot carry the goods from Mombasa through to Maraba and then it goes to the other side? That defeats my thinking completely. Now, the other thing I wanted to follow up with you, when we actually
Who is
talk...
being questioned here, Abdiba? Me or what?
No,
You're being questioned.
you, my colleague. Now, when we talk about being positive, we are not criticizing for the sake of criticizing, and we are all positive. When when we open our mouths here and speak about the truth of what is on the ground, we are seen as though we are anti-development. We are not. The statistics speak for themselves. We actually would like to see the infrastructure of this country, build to a level, to standard that you see in other countries. Because we are a big economy in this region, we are talking about East African integration, we are talking about monetary integration, we are even sometimes dreaming about political federation at some point. So when we are actually saying the Kenyan fabric is so corrupt that we need to wake up, we mean it. We are not saying those who are corrupt. We are saying the entire, in fact, I don't even want to classify parliament, judiciary, the executive, all of us. There is something wrong somewhere. And that something needs to be, we need to put a finger on what is wrong with us. We need to go back and look at our national values and find out where we went wrong. Because we can't definitely live the way we are living. If you look at the death ratios now, a child who is not born as a death on their head, what does that mean? Now, the SGR costed what? 440 billion to get from Mombasa to Nairobi. And then we were also again borrowing 165 to extend it to Naivasha. Now, we are looking for money to take it from Naivasha to... Why didn't we? My father told me once upon a time when I was a young girl. My dad said, don't build a house you can't finish. You would be laughed at. This is what Kenya is doing. How do we start to build something we can't finish? One. Two, the other thing I want to say, we have to be careful where we borrow from. And I've always said this, and I don't want a visa to China. The truth of the matter is, the Chinese are not part of the debt sustainability framework of the international community. Their contracts are completely with fine print. We don't even know what we are signing. I can guarantee you that. We don't know what the contracts we are signing with the Chinese. We don't know what we are taking because the fine print is too fine. That is one. Now, we need to borrow from there. Nobody says no. But we need to be careful how we borrow. We need to be careful how we look at our debt stock, whether we are getting it domestically, and when we are getting it domestically, what are we actually destroying? It is the common person, the common mwananchi, the Wanjiko. She cannot borrow. Wanjiko cannot borrow because even the government is on the domestic debt. They are busy borrowing from the domestic, market. Now, for the infrastructure, which is a good thing, we just need to wake up. As in this country, we need to review our national values. We need to see where we went wrong so that we can make it right for our children and for this country to move forward. As for now, as my colleague here was saying, I don't see us moving forward. We are completely under debt. We are in a hole. We need to put ourselves up. And once we have brought ourselves to the service, then we can start planning again. But the railway has to go to the border.
No, I think
that is the only time it will make sense.
You have answered yourself what the first one was asking. That's what was that leader asking. Why do I go for this thing? Is it viable? Do I have the money to do it? That's the point I was raising.
Why did we start it from Mombasa? Was it viable in the first place? That is where we need to start.
And that's a done deal. And I think we have to understand it even when we government. It's the best thing to do for transportation. SGR per se is good. Yeah,
we understand that.
We'll be having 1 year Madaraka Day first. And I think the things which came in, you already pointed out, is even this kind of thing we're having. A piece of land is costing 20 million, well actually it's 5. That's why the cost came up. Because him and I, is 20, is 15, we can decide on that. And we know what has happened in that. I think fundamentally you're asking the question, what's wrong with that?
Yeah, that's my
And
question.
probably something we should have addressed. We create a country, not a nation. That's my truth. We created a country, we didn't create a nation. And probably we need to go back and start saying, who are we as a country?
Okay, let's hear from...
Before you go there, just to conclude on this point, it's very important for us to understand that the SGR, and please, and I will say it on national TV, we have heard that what is after Naivasha, the other side, what are we importing from there? So let's also leave the politics. And let's stop thinking about this country as a nation, as you put it.
Right.
Let's not think now that it has covered the good area that we want, let it go to other Mount Kenya, Raptor, and it goes. It needs to go to Busia so that we can get all the landlocked countries to be serviced.
And if we're told then it's going to, because we had also government will create special economic zones as well, are we leasing these special economic zones lands to China as well, as they've done with other countries? That is something also we're not being told. These are some of the, gritty details that we need to know as well. Okay, Collins Odote.
Debate, just two things on SGR. I think the debate as to whether it should go to Busia or not is laced both in economics and politics. And I think it's important to, when we're discussing, to determine whether we're discussing the politics or the economics.
But you can never separate it.
You can or you can't. If you're making an economic argument, it should be an economic argument. And I think for me, on the economics, the problem with the SGR has never been its design. Design is not the problem. No. So from a design perspective, there is nothing wrong with the SGR coming from Mombasa to Malaba. In fact, if it doesn't reach Malaba, then we are stopping the process halfway, because the entire idea was to transport goods across East Africa. I think the problem started arising when we couldn't even reach an agreement with our East African neighbors. The big issue with the SGR is the economics. And the economics is because we are getting loans at a sustainable level. Just when we now couldn't get the loan from China, which we are being told we didn't ask for, you hear all of a sudden, oh, now we will revive the old railway.
The meter gauge.
Yes. Many guys asked from the start, why are we constructing a new railway and not reviving the old one? But oh no, it can't happen. How come now it is possible for it to happen from Naivasha to Kisumu? Is there a difference between that meter gauge and the one that was going to Mombasa? Economically doesn't make sense.
No.
But the second aspect is something that I think Wainaina alluded to just a little bit, and I wanted to underscore, is if you look at, I think just last week when it was now reported that the loan would not come, one of the interesting newspaper articles said that some gentleman had bought land for 4 million in Suswa. Now, there's nothing he can do with that land. Because
Purely to speculate on.
yes, any of us knows that land between Suswa and Narok is not more than 100,000 an acre. It's not rocket science. Everybody knows. Even if you go today and you're looking for land, it's around 70, 80, 100,000. Somebody bought it for 2 million. And they bought it principally because SGR was coming. What were they planning on doing? They were planning on doing what we've seen the National Land Commission doing. That once land that is supposed to be sold for 100,000, people are then compensated for 10 million an acre. Because the bulk of that money is being divided amongst the boys and nowadays also with the girls. If we don't stop that kind of approach, we can debate SGR, we can debate any project. If you then go to even the dam in Kerio, if you looked at yesterday's newspapers, you now see that the community there is planting maize in that same land that was supposed to be used. Already money has been taken, but communities are still planting. If you look at today's Business Daily, we're being told the Eldoret bypass will be delayed because of compensation. Debal, unless we call this thing for what it is, unless we deal with our corruption, our issues will end.
Thank
My
you.
last issue, look at the headlines of
Yesterday's Business Daily.
Yesterday's Business Daily. Inflation, levies, dim employment earnings outlook. It tells you that our inflation rate is at a 19-month high. What does that mean? It means that we are increasingly having life difficult. Yesterday when workers went to Uhuru Park, every year it's always been a ritual that the lowest earning gets some increases. They got zero. Yet at the same time, and I think as Dr. Gisami was talking about it, we see a process of trying to review the high-end salaries for public servants. High-end, not all public servants. We must stop this habit of thinking that the only people who feel the pressure are politicians and high-end earners. Ordinary citizens are feeling the pressure of inflation, and that's where our focus must be. But because the numbers are high, it is convenient to ignore them. The only way to deal with it is to ensure that we fix our economy so the economy is doing well. Then everybody can get the benefits of economic growth.
And it's actually barely a year since we had the Board of Directors allowances increased, and still we have the civil service also saying that, yeah, we're going to review that again. Right. Maybe the person who really feels the brunt of SGR, because they say that, yes, this has actually been, or they're hailing it as a success as it is right now, is Juan Salim, and he will tell us, of course, he's from the Hauliers and Freighters Union. He will tell us more on the reality of SGR as it is, because he's the person also who seems to have borne the brunt, as I've said, of the SGR, besides the cost of doing business, which has worsened because of being compelled to use SGR. First of all, people being compelled to use SGR out of, not really their own volition. Also, railways or all over is supposed to be cheaper mode of transport. It is different with the Kenyans with the SGR. Let's just also take in some comments from Salim from Mombasa. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Dibal.
Yes, thank you for joining us this morning. Because, yes, first, tell us, first of all, the association that you're with right now, and you're the people who can actually speak on the reality of SGR very briefly. Can you just give us the reality of the ground?
Thank you so much, Dibal. Thank you for the panelist contribution. Dibal, we are not against any infrastructure development in this country. That is what everybody should know. What we are against is an infrastructure development that brings about an increased cost of doing business. If that happens, me and you and the panelists know very well we will end up paying more at the shelf in terms of the cost, final cost for any goods or services that we wish to enjoy in this country. So that is the bottom line. As it is now, all over the world, there's no railways that is more expensive to move as a mode of transport to move goods than road. And this is the reality on the ground. We are seeing ourselves paying, and I've said this many times, that is not right for somebody to be compelled to move a 20 feet or 40 feet container at a more cost than moving it by road. Because by the end of the day, this works on the total cost of doing business. And the bottom line is we are all at the ports, at port of exit, port of entry. The idea is when we do business, we want to see our costs reduced. So this is a major, besides all these other costs of, inflated construction for the SGR and many other costs. The bottom line is we are now spending more on SGR, and the unfortunate bit is we are forced to do it. If it was what we call a willing seller, willing buyer basis, nobody will be criticizing the SGR. But as it is now, the government is forcing people to use the SGR for as long as your contract is in Nairobi, whether you are likely to enjoy a cheaper mode of transport, that is road, or not, you are compelled to use it. This is the bone of contention now. Factories are closing down. The manufacturing sector is affected because the cost of doing business is gone up. The volumes have also been seen to be going down because the cost is high. I've talked to quite a number of importers, and they are telling me their cost has more than tripled because of the SGR. There's the actual cost of transportation, and then there's the logistics cost of clearing that goods to the final premises, which adds up now to the 1420, which is the railage bid for 20-feet container, to almost 3,000. And for 40-feet container, which is 2340, just to transport it by rail. And then there's the additional cost, ex-ICD. You end up paying even $4,000. So this is now what is eating up the industry.
Thank you.
The freight logistics chain.
Thank you.
Addressed, not today.
Right.
Yesterday.
Just briefly, as also we are winding up with you, tell us about the idle capacity. Now, when we ferry all these goods from Mombasa to Nairobi, I'm given to understand as well, going back, we have all this, freight going empty, or maybe all this, what do I call it? The cargo, the SGR cargo
Yes.
holds actually going back to Mombasa empty. Yeah.
You are right. You are right, Dibal. You know very well. We have more imports than. Sorry, Dibal. Yes, you are right. You know very well the imbalance of trade in this region. We have more imports than is exports. So certainly, yes, there's a lot of traffic in terms of containers move down, and there is imports going up. So yes, that imbalance of trade makes the whole thing again SGR not viable.
All right. Thank you.
We are told by the experts that even if we move everything from the port of Mombasa to Nairobi, we still cannot make a sustainable profit.
Thank you.
For the SGR to work.
Thank you, Salim.
We are compelled to move everything for Nairobi, but even if we move the cargo meant for Mombasa by SGR, still we will not make enough profits to make that facility viable, the SGR.
Thank you, Salim. For the benefit of our viewers and our panelists as well, which association do you also speak for, or are you in?
I'm a member of Kenya International Freight and Warehousing Association.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you, Salim. Right. That is just a snippet of some of the use of SGR and what they're feeling on the ground as well. And he alludes to the fact that also from the manufacturing sector, many are closing shop because the cost of doing business is not feasible in this country. And my question as well is, we saw recently also on the front page of a Business Daily, this was the 1st of April, that 15 NSE firms have issued alerts as profit plunge by 14 billion shillings. If you look at that, that was what was on the front page of a Business Daily. 15 NSE, Nairobi Security Exchange firms issue alert as profit plunge 14 billion shillings. Yet we have an economy that has grown by 6.3, 6.1 or 6.2? 6.3% in the last financial year. How does this apply? Kwame, if you look at that particular headline, and yet we say that the economy has grown by 6.3%, we need to question again the metrics of using how we gauge the growth in this country as well. And I think that is something that we've raised on this. Maybe you can speak to that as well, briefly.
Let's start with the fact that I think Kenyans should be very alert to the fact that the Nairobi Securities Exchange is an important it's an important part of Kenya's economy, but the NSC is not Kenyan economy. It's a reflection of a few companies, many are likely successful, which trade on it, and they're trading securities out there. So the fact that its performance correlates with economic performance sometimes doesn't necessarily mean that we should think about it, especially for a country such as ours, which is mostly agricultural and many people do things out there. But that stated, we know, for instance, that many Kenyans ask ourselves, if we grow at 6.3%, remember, the African average is less than 3, about 2%. Kenya is one of the highest at 6.3%, and our people are saying wages have been stagnant. It's just telling you that something is not. And my suspicion is part of this might be, unlike many people who think the data is cooked, I don't think so. I think what has happened is the way we measure it, which is some of these are government's transactions with itself. Payments across being recorded as part of that growth, some of the large infrastructure that we're also investing in, and some of the spending that comes from trying to pay for that infrastructure records as part of the value added in the economy, when if you net them out, obviously you'll find that most of these are transactions that government has had with itself. And that might give a bigger view about how far the economy has grown than not. Because if you think about it, most Kenyans, I mean 60%, 65, 70% of working Kenyans are actually in farms. So agricultural production just grew, which is good, but not by as much as 6%, so it's actually much less, by I think about 4 or thereabouts. So suggesting to us that most of this growth has been in sectors that are not labor intensive. So for instance, IT, finance, technologies, which are capital intensive sectors, but the sectors that actually require jobs, such as manufacturing, which also grew after having shrunk for a while, is good. But the 6.3% can be actually deceptive about what the real economic conditions of Kenyans are. And it's a good thing that Kenyans are asking for a discussion around it.
All right, because they say that GDP, which is a product of a post-war Bretton Woods system, is not adequate anymore to capture all aspects of a country's well-being, such as education, healthcare system. And we had also Joseph Stiglitz, a prominent economist, saying GDP is too materialistic. Too materialistic. So we are not getting the reality of the ground, is it?
No, I mean, I think we need to understand that GDP measures specific things. It was meant to measure. It's an accounting method for how much goods and services are produced in a country per year. So basically, when you turn that into monetary terms, that's true. Now, it doesn't tell you how that growth is distributed, in the sense that who has it gone to and who has created it, which is the other single thing. So you're right that GDP needs to be looked at together with a few other things that measure.
Absolutely, you can't just look straight on. You need to bring in the issue of Gini coefficient. You need to bring the issue of poverty levels. Then you can actually start unpacking that GDP and see exactly what it means. And I think, as you say, Strickler and the other economists from the Chicago Business School, they have brought a lot of School of Economics. They have brought a lot of discussion. Nonetheless, I think it's more important, in my view, not so much to do on the GDP. I think to me it's 6.3. So what? Japan grew by 1.2%. The cost of living is better, but how much do we distribute that in terms of? And that's to me what is important.
Suba.
Yes, I think personally I would say that I find it difficult, though of course Dr. Dote has invited us to, parcel out the economic from the political. But I find it extremely difficult that you can discuss issues of debt, issues of, this, massive infrastructure development, without, getting into the politics. Because I think one of the reasons our president and the team that went to China was not able to secure a commitment on the extension of the SGR from Naivasha to Kisumu is because of our politics as Kenya, between Kenya and Uganda. And I think the assignment that the team that went may not have shared with the public is that they will be listened to more attentively if they give the assurance that Uganda is on board the SGR. We know as a fact, and economists like Kwame have told us, that the viability of SGR beyond Naivasha reduces to around 30%. And I think part of the reason the wagons are going back to Mombasa empty is because of the lack of goods that ought to have come from the neighboring Uganda, so that they're able also to, bring in. And we import a lot. Uganda is one of Kenya's greatest partner in terms of trade. If you go to small-scale business people here in Nyamakima, they'll tell you the grains they sell come from Uganda. In our own office, we use milk, Lotto. It comes from Uganda. So there are a lot of goods on our shelves of supermarkets and elsewhere. Those goods need to come through the SGR. And I think it is not possible, as the economists have invited us to think, that it is possible to isolate politics from the economic part of it. I think the manner in which we mismanaged the East African community that collapsed also has a role to play in all these things that we see. I think as a country, there's a sense in which we offended Tanzania, for example. The manner in which we said, we had the East African Airways, for example. At the point of disintegration of the East African Airways, were the planes, for example, shared equally? Or did Kenya say, for example, that any plane that was at JKIA at the time became property of the Kenyan government?
Thank you.
Did we, for example, there's this place we call Community. The history is that it was the headquarters of the East African community. Did we amass all that for ourselves at the expense of our neighbors? And these are the truths that are affecting some of the economic development that we hope to achieve.
All right, as we're winding up briefly, of course, you alluded to the growth of manufacturing sector, and maybe you can pick up this on the Economic Survey of 2019. Manufacturing sector, I think, increased, real value added increased by 4.2%. I can scroll also to the construction sector, it expanded by 6.3%. Transport and storage also expanded by 14.6%. Education, it goes on to tourism sector, information. Also, there was significant growth, but we have 2019 outlook here that says performance of Kenya's economy looks less optimistic in 2019 on account of a number of factors. They are all given here. Long rains have delayed, and weather forecast indicates that most parts of the country will experience depressed rainfall, while a number of others may record almost long rains failure. That is just a snippet of it, of how also 19 will look. But briefly, as we're winding up, Dr. Rachel, you can tell us more about this outlook of the economy briefly as we're winding up of 2019.
Okay.
Or what you had prepared in mind. Maybe I've thrown you off and you had prepared to say this.
No, that is okay. When you look at the outlook, I mean, we have a lot of economic parameters that measure, and as Kwame was saying, these are measurement instruments, and they are the only instruments we have at least to have a measure of the economy. And as I said here last few weeks ago, it is very clear that a country has to grow 10% consistently for 10 years to get into a middle income country. So when you look at the outlook today, there are so many factors that are mastering. Yes, there is a drought, but drought, whether we had planned for this drought, we won't be feeling it as much as we are right now. Because when you look at our food basket, the maize, for example, when you hear about what they are talking about, there is maize being hoarded to be sold later for more. we are trying to import maize so that we can provide food in Kenya when we can actually plan to store our own food, our own grains for the dry season. So when you look at the economic fundamentals of this country, clearly it is going to be gloomy as we go forward. Even the growth, when you look at the growth, yes, we might be saying, okay, we are not the worst, we are growing at 5% and so forth. But when you look at the food situation, the drought itself,
Thank you.
It brings a problem.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, maybe just as we're winding up, briefly to read some of your comments here as we're winding up. We have Ravas John saying the problem is not the loans, but misuse of the loans to personal gain resulting to lack
That's
of
what we
money
said.
to repay the loans. If the loans are well spent as planned and in profitable ventures, repayment will not be an issue. Corruption is responsible for non-repayment. That is what Ravas says. Also, we have Frederick Omondi Okello saying, I concur, the Kenyan economy is the people's ability to trade, buy and sell products and services, manufacture and ship their wares. We have also Richard Onslow Roper saying, where are we going with this country, really? Will life get any easier? I don't think anyone can help us except God. Also, Irene Gitao, she's saying, it will keep getting higher since there is absolutely nothing being done about it by the government. We have been failed. And also we have Nyamogi Gogni saying, interestingly, some men in Kenya have looted a lot and grabbed a lot from the innocent, and that makes them feel unsafe and use extra bodyguards wherever they go. I think this is the issue of security you are alluding to. And you say this while manufacturing are moving out due to high tariffs and taxes. We have also economist Joe saying 2018-2019 budget estimate stands at 2.8 trillion shillings. KRA cannot collect that amount. That means more debt to finance the budget. I think we should now budget with what we have to reduce debt burden. And lastly, because a lot of them I can't read on unsustainable debt burden, I've read his BlackBerry saying, what do the following words often used by our panelists mean? Common Mwananchi, ordinary Kenyans, innocent Kenyans, even Wanjiku. In contrast to what type Kenyans? These words have a negative connotation for Kenyans, he thinks. And also, we are waking up to some bad news as well. This is from Tanzania, just to show you here. And this is Reginald Mengi. Dr. Reginald Mengi has passed on. He's a Tanzanian business mogul there. Billionaire and business mogul. We don't have the gritty details as yet, but that is the current information right now. We know him of the IPP Media, quite a very influential business mogul in Tanzania. So we'll get all the gritty details of this, and of course also tell you more of that as well. He was actually named by the Forbes as one of the richest persons in Africa. And standing by then, that was 2014, Africa's 50 richest net worth. That is 560 million US dollars he has passed on. So we'll give you all the great details of this much later in the course of the program. But I want to thank our panelists this morning, Kome Owino, who is the CEO of Institute of Economic Affairs. Also, we had with us Dr. Collins Odote from the University of Nairobi. He's a columnist also with the Business Daily. Also with us this morning, we had Dr. Gituro Wanaina, who's a lecturer at the University of Nairobi. And also he is the former CEO of Vision 2030. We didn't pin you down.
Next time we'll talk about it. I'll put it in the table.
Yeah, and also Churchill Suba, who is the national coordinator of the National Civil Society Congress, and Dr. Rachel Gesami, who is lecturer for economics and also director for quality at the Catholic University, quality assurance at the Catholic University. Thank you for coming through this morning. Really do appreciate also your tweets and driving the show with us. You've been watching In the Market here on AM Live. Sorry, I didn't give you a chance to give your closing remarks.
Yeah, we are
stuff for times. Thank you very much nonetheless. Next time, all right?